الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الأمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وتنجي الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. Dear respected brothers and elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today's topic is a discussion and analysis of how the modern world that we live in today does not want to believe in God. It is a world where they claim they have annulled the existence and the need and the necessity of God. So today's topic is going to be more of a historical discussion, wherein we will talk and discuss about the factors that led to the modern problem that we have today. However, this talk will not discuss the different proofs or arguments for or against the existence or the knowledge of God. With that being said, this topic is an extensive topic. This topic can take over 15, 16 weeks of discussion. But today we'll try to summarize as much as we can into an hour lecture, inshallah ta'ala. So keep that in mind, keep this caveat in mind, that there will be points where we'll have to simplify and probably even oversimplify certain things. And that's just how we will have to do it with this 1 hour lecture, inshallah ta'ala. So as you can see on the slides, we're going to go through 6 different aspects, inshallah, if we have time within the hour. The first is some basic discussions, definitions, terms, some background context. We're going to start with the 1500s, common era, and then move our way down, inshallah. The second, third, and fourth point are, but second, third, and fourth are going to be 3 different factors that led to the downfall of the church and which led to the rise of atheism. And number 4, we're going to talk about 2 different types of atheisms that took root in the 1800s. And lastly, we'll talk about the new atheist movement, inshallah ta'ala. Next slide. You can just keep it. Okay. So first we need to get some terms, okay? We need to know what an agnostic is, and we need to know what an atheist is. There's a difference between the two. An agnostic is making an epistemological claim. Does anyone know what an epistemology is? Raise it. Anybody would like to take a guess? Yes, go ahead.
Study of how you understand things.
Okay. Anything else?
What your sources of knowledge are.
Yeah, correct. Epistemology is a sub-branch of philosophy that deals with knowledge. The nature of knowledge, the sources of knowledge, what we do with knowledge, how do we get knowledge. These are questions about knowledge. An agnostic is stating that he does not know about the existence or the lack of existence of God. An agnostic is making an epistemological claim. An agnostic is saying, I don't know if God exists or doesn't exist. I cannot affirm nor disavow God's existence. That's what an agnostic is saying. An atheist, on the other hand, is making an ontological claim. Ontology is a branch of philosophy that deals with existence, the things that exist. For example, a Muslim's ontology is the world around us, atoms, the universe, humans, angels, jinn, God, the hereafter. A materialist or an atheist ontology is just going to be the material world around us. So ontology is what we believe exists out there. So an atheist is not making an epistemological claim. He's not saying, I don't know if God exists or doesn't exist. An atheist is making an ontological claim. He is saying that God does not exist. Yani, in his ontology, there's no such thing as God. God is outside of the things that exist. There's no such thing that exists that is known as God. So this is a very important distinction between an agnostic and an atheist. Because many of the arguments for atheism are not ontological arguments. They are epistemological arguments. Many times an atheist will present an argument and say, hey, I have proof that God doesn't exist. But it's more about the knowledge of God's existence. There is no proof for the lack of existence of God. There is no proof, but there is no ontological proof for the lack of existence of God. But that's a point for another discussion. But keep these terms in mind: agnostic and atheist. Okay, and many times an atheist will conflate his argument by presenting an epistemological argument to make an ontological claim. So these are important terms that we should know. Epistemology has to do with knowledge. Ontology has to do with existence. Okay, so to understand our story today, it's a large, big story. And what I kind of want to highlight is this one sentence, okay? Is that atheism is a reaction to Catholic Christianity. Again, this one sentence we go home with. Atheism is a response, a counter-reaction to Catholicism. And that is what we're going to talk about today. So to understand this, we need to understand how the church worked. The church is not, our understanding, this is the 1500s. We're starting with the 1500s. In the 1500s, the church is not going on a Sunday every other weekend and you're righteous. That's not what the church is. The church in the 1500s had complete authority of everything. There's this empire called the Holy Roman Empire. They aren't holy, they aren't Roman, and they're not an empire. But that's their name. Okay, the Holy Roman Empire. When you hear the term Roman, there's a lot of different denotations of Roman. You have the early Roman Republic, then you have the Roman Empire, then you have the Eastern Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire. This is after all of that. This is known as the Holy Roman Empire. And how the Holy Roman Empire worked is that you had the head Pope. And this Pope put the king in charge. The Pope put the king in charge. The king doesn't appoint the Pope. The Pope appoints the king. So the Pope is above even the king. So the church, where the Pope resides and he dictates his mandates from, is not just something that you go on a Sunday. No, the church has spiritual authority, religious authority, economic authority, and political authority as well. So the church is the state. You know, we hear about church, the separation of church and state. Well, back then, the church was the state. The church had complete authority of the state and all economic, financial, political decisions. So keep this in mind. So this is how the church was. This is how Christianity was. So they had a firm grip on society. Not necessarily a tyrannical rule, but the way the world worked in medieval Europe was that Christianity had authority. So for atheism to take root, this church needs to go down. The church has to go down. So we're going to talk about 3 factors that led to the church losing its authority. And the first is the Reformation movement. Can someone tell me what the Reformation movement is? Yes?
Emphasis on the sciences and the arts and everything like that.
That's the Renaissance. They think of the Renaissance. What is the Reformation movement? Protestant Reformation movement. Anybody?
Martin Luther.
Yes?
Martin Luther.
Yes, Martin Luther. Okay? You can go to the next slide. The Reformation movement started specifically by an individual by the name of Martin Luther. He's a German priest. He's a person who read the Bible. In classic Catholicism, an average person did not read the Bible. Couldn't read the Bible, didn't necessarily read the Bible. He was a priest. He was also a theologian. So he knew his stuff. And he saw that the church was not acting holy. He saw that the church was not doing what the church is supposed to be doing. The church is involved in dunyawi matters. Too much involved in dunyawi matters. They were building all these fancy churches, fancy architectural endeavors. And where were they taking the money from? From the average Tom, Dick, and Harry. The average Christian person. How? They would say that, look, for you to do Dawah in Catholicism, to do Dawah, you can't just raise your hand and do Dawah, like we Muslims do. You have to go to the priest. There are many ways that you can do Dawah, and they can accept your Dawah. Many different ways. But the preferred method became indulgences. And indulgences, basically sadaqah. You give sadaqah to the church, and I, on behalf of God, forgive you for your sins. And that became the preferred method. It was one amongst many who existed, but the church started to highlight this one. Hey, you want to get forgiven? Pay your indulgences, pay your sadaqah. The church became rich. The church would use this for their endeavors. Martin Luther found this to to be very problematic, amongst many other things. And he has his famous 95 theses that he pinned onto the door of the church. Whether that's true or not, but the point was that became widespread. The reason his contention became widespread is because right around this time, something else was also invented. Anyone know what that is? Yes, printing press. The printing press was invented. People before saw contentions. People before saw problems in the church. But this time, that thesis and the Bible was rapidly printed. In less than a decade or so, about 9 million copies of the Bible was printed. Now the average Joe, the average Tom, Dick, and Harry, he's reading the Bible. He sees what Martin Luther has to say, and they realize the church is not acting according to the Bible. So this is known as the Reformation. And he makes some significant changes to how Christianity is run. So Luther, he has these two famous statements: by faith alone and by scripture alone. Like I said before, if you wanted to be forgiven, you have to go to the priest, and you have to get forgiven. Luther says you don't need the church to get forgiven. Just have iman, you're forgiven. Just have belief, and you're forgiven. He also said that you don't need, basically, in their language, what they said, you don't need a ulama. You don't need scholars, you don't need priests. Just read the book. Just read the Bible and come to your conclusion. You don't need the priest. So what this does, it takes an emphasis off from the Catholic Church. You don't need the priest to get forgiven, nor do you need the priest to understand religion. So why do I need the church? Why do I need the church? Is the church really that authoritative in my life? Not anymore. And this starts off what we call the Reformation movement. It basically broke the Catholic monopoly over Christianity and religious authority. So the Protestant Christianity spreads, and there's a bunch of wars. We're not going to get into that. But it undermined the Catholic religious authority. So this is the first factor that led to the undermining of the church's authority. The second factor is the historical critical method. The historical critical method is taking a skeptical attitude to historical reports. This historical critical method, it started off with this famous document called the Donation of Constantine. See, the Holy Roman Emperor, or the Holy Roman Empire, when the Pope wanted to kind of have authority over the Holy Roman Empire, they say, on what basis do you have authority? These are original Roman lands. On what basis do you have authority to dictate whatever happens in Western Europe? I'm skipping a lot of details. He said, well, there's this document from Constantine, the great emperor of the Romans, who said all the Western lands are now under the authority of the Pope. All the Western lands are under the authority of the Pope. So people accepted that. Like, okay, I guess there is this authority. He was vested authority by Constantine years ago. Well, when they analyzed that document, they came to realize there are some historical anachronisms. An anachronism is if you find a word existing in an old document that should not have been. For example, if you read Shakespeare and you see the word cell phone, or iPad, or iPhone, you're going to doubt that this book is actually an actual book of Shakespeare. Read Aristotle. If you read something in the past, 1,000 years ago, and it's claimed to be 1,000 years ago, and you see the word cell phone in there, that's going to throw off some. That's going to be quite confusing and perplexing. So likewise, in the nation of Constantine, they saw some words that are being used in that document that should not have existed back at that time. Then they realized, oh, this document is forged. So like, wait a minute, let's take this analysis and look at the Bible as well. So when they looked at the Bible, they also found that the verse of the Trinity also has some historical anachronism. It's not there in the original text. It's not there in the original text. Again, this gives a huge amount of doubt in Christianity and in the authority of the Bible and the authority of the church if they hit this fact. So this is not the historical critical method. And this is nothing new for Muslims. We have this in our hadith literature. We analyze how we do our hadith. and the way we look at the Senate, we look at the method, we have a whole detailed way of doing it. But for them, this is shocking. For them, this showed that the authority of their Pope and church was based upon a forged document, and their religion and their book, and their religious book also has some problems as well. So again, the church is losing authority. And the third factor, and very important factor, and quite misunderstood, is the scientific revolution. As you guys know, the scientific revolution is the grand story, the grand narrative that we learn in high school, we learn in university, is that the church was oppressive against science. The church was oppressive against enlightenment. The church was oppressive against scientific endeavors. Then came the hero Galileo, and he broke from the bulwark of darkness, and he rose as a shining hero to advance science. That's the story that we hear, that's the story that we talk about, that's the story that we learn throughout our educational upbringing in the West. That's not quite true. The church was not anti-science. The church was not anti-science. Galileo himself was a part of the church. He was a scientist appointed by the church. There were other people who worked as scientists. They were not against science or what I would like to say, human understanding of the world. They definitely were not against human understanding of the world. We have to understand a few things before we get there. The first is a scientific paradigm. I should have asked you guys before, but it's already up there. It's fine. A scientific paradigm. How science works is that it works under a paradigm. Okay? Just raise your hand. Anyone here has heard of Thomas Kuhn? Okay. Some of you guys have. So you guys might be familiar with the term paradigm. Thomas Kuhn was a philosopher in the late 1900s or mid 1900s, and he had this idea of paradigm. Reading is, if you just look Google and read it, we don't have time for that right now. But a paradigm is science works within a paradigm. A paradigm is an interconnected web of different theories. Okay? You can think of it as a jigsaw puzzle. So each piece in a jigsaw puzzle is not equal. Some pieces within a jigsaw puzzle are very core. If you're missing the middle piece, your jigsaw puzzle is going to look incomplete. If you're missing the little piece on the side, it's not the end. Right? You still got the complete picture. Likewise, science works under a paradigm. And this paradigm is also like a jigsaw puzzle. You will have some theories that are secondary, they're not so important, they're on the side. If they end up being false, it's not a big deal. But you have some central theories, central laws of how you understand the universe. If that ends up being wrong, your entire system collapses, comes crashing down. Okay? Up to the 1500s, for 2,000 years, the scientific paradigm that they worked under was known as the Aristotelian paradigm. Again, attributed after Aristotle. It's not strictly Aristotle, but it worked under that framework. The Aristotelian paradigm. And it's quite impressive that how many things they got right with just using their mind and observation. They didn't have telescopes, they didn't have microscopes, but they got quite a few things right. However, there are certain theories that are core to Aristotelian science, to the way you work in the Aristotelian paradigm. Those theories were found to be false in the 1500s. Those theories were found to be false. Namely, is the geocentric model. Earth is the center of the universe. This was core to the Aristotelian paradigm. Galileo comes along, not just him, there's Copernicus, there's Kepler, there's a bunch of other people. But Galileo invents a telescope and he's able to kind of solidify the idea of wait a minute. The Earth is not the center of the universe, it's the sun. Or it's not, we're not rotating around the Earth. I mean, everything around is not rotating around the Earth. Rather, we're all rotating around the sun. Now, normally, this just would have been a scientific discovery. No problem, whatever, class. Earth, sun, no big deal. But there's two problems. Number one, this is central to the Aristotelian paradigm. And number two, for reasons that we cannot discuss right now, Christianity was super connected to the Aristotelian paradigm, such that their theology was affected by the Aristotelian paradigm. Again, Christianity was super connected with the Aristotelian paradigm, such that their theology was even affected by the Aristotelian paradigm. So, if the Aristotelian paradigm is shown to be false, what is also going to have some prominent holes? Christian theology as well. Christian theology as well. So, now we have these scientific understandings that are refuting some of the core tenets of Aristotelian science, which is connected to Christian Catholic theology. That's going to be a problem. However, normally if there was some substantive discovery, the church would have been like, okay, no problem. We'll take the Bible verse, we'll do some metaphor, we'll do a little bit of the jazz. We'll take a little bit of unliteral understanding. No big deal. They normally would have done that. But there was another problem, the Reformation movement. These Protestants will say, hey, these Christians are not being true to the Bible. The Catholics are not being true to the Bible. So if they start twisting a little bit, it will end up a problem on the other side. So they're like, forget this, we're not going to accept this, we're just going to ban Galileo, we're going to ignore his findings, we're going to ignore his writings, and we're going to just kick this idea out. They would have been fine with it, they really don't care, right? It's not like they were anti-science. It's just that the other pressure from the Protestants that they were going through, they had to now just ignore Galileo's findings because they didn't want to go against the law, they didn't want to go against the literal understanding of the Bible. Okay? So now this is another factor that gave a huge problem to Catholicism or Christianity and the church, the authority of the church. We have three factors. We have the Reformation movement, we have the historical critical method, and we have the scientific discovery. Each in of their own might have not been a problem, but all together, it really undermines the authority of the church. Now, a little bit of a tangent. This same discovery, if it happened in the Muslim world, it would have been completely unproblematic. Because the Muslims also did science according to Aristotelian paradigm. But their theology was not connected, per se. Our core tenets of belief were not connected to the Aristotelian paradigm. Yeah, the way we did Ilmul Kalam, for those who know the term, the way that we did dialectic theology, the way that we engaged with our interlocutors was based upon the Aristotelian paradigm. But our Aqidah was not connected to the Aristotelian paradigm. So if there was a problem that completely refuted Aristotelian paradigm, it would have not affected Muslims at all. And by way of fact, for those of you who might be familiar with some of the terms and some of the names of the book, if you look at some of the classical books of Kalam or classical books of Aqidah, if you look at Mawaqif of Iji, if you look at Razi, there are many times where they will contradict Aristotelian paradigm. It's completely fine. They will go against Aristotelian paradigm. Why? Because it doesn't affect our Aqidah. They were just doing science. They were just understanding the world and how it works. It's not connected to our Aqidah. But for the Christians, again, I'm super simplifying this. There's a lot more detail over here. Right? So, those of you who have some knowledge on this, don't think I'm just ignoring all that. We don't have time to get into all the details. But, since Aqidah was connected to the Christian theology, the Christian theology was connected to the Aristotelian paradigm. And when the Aristotelian paradigm went down, so did the authority of the Christian church also went down. So these three factors led to problems with the authority of the church. It's just a summary of what I just said. Go back to slide for 1 second. So now there's a lot of doubt in the air. There's a lot of doubt in the air. The church is not using their funding properly. The way they get their funding is problematic. What they're using is in dunyawi matters. The Bible is not really that legitimate. There's problems with the Bible. There's problems with their theology. The Aristotelian paradigm came crashing down. There's all these problems. There's a lot of doubt in the Catholic Church. So there's quite a few individuals and philosophers and thinkers that start to adopt a position called Theism. Theism is the idea that God exists, but it's not a personal God. God exists out there, He created the world, but He didn't send revelation. So the Bible is not the Word of God. God exists, but we don't have any Sharia per se. We don't have to do anything per se. So this is an idea that picks up, and people adopt it. It's called Theism. It's kind of the segue to atheism. So there are two types of atheism: scientific and humanistic atheisms. These are both atheisms that took place in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. After theism, again, a lot of these thinkers believe in the existence of God, but they don't believe in Sharia. Then new ideas have come to play, and that is where we get atheism. Because now Catholicism or Christianity is out. There's a bunch of Protestant religions now. There's a bunch of Protestant Christianities. You have Lutherans. You have a bunch of other guys as well, all claiming to be Christians and claiming to represent the truth. England and Europe, sorry, not England, Europe is a mess right now. Europe is a mess right now. So and these people are not following the Sharia, and they believe in the existence of God, but that also comes crashing down with, again, more explanations. They're able to explain more things. And as they're able to explain more things, they say, hey, we don't need God anymore. So there's two types, scientific and humanistic. The first is scientific. It's a denial of the existence of God and viewing religion as an ancient myth that developed in the absence of scientific understanding of the world. Or an easier way to understand this is that people in the past, when they saw lightning strike, when they saw earthquakes, when they saw rain, when they saw tornadoes, they couldn't explain these things. So they had to posit God. Supernatural, these events had to be explained through supernatural, a supernatural being known as God or gods. However, now that we have the ilm, now that we understand, now that we know how the world works, and we know the details of the causal mechanics, we can now calculate positions in the sky. We can now calculate through different types of configurations of the world. We know how the world works. So there's no need for religion anymore. Religion served this purpose in the past as a convoluted and a made-up thing that people use to explain the world. But we don't need that anymore. We have science. Science can now explain everything. Science can explain how the world works, so there's no need for God. And now, another factor that grew up within going back to scientific atheism is progress. The idea now that mankind will progress as science progresses. The more science progresses, the more man will progress. The more technological advancements and the more that we understand the world that we live in, we will progress more. So there's this term known as the theory of everything. There will be this one theory that can explain every single phenomenon in the world. Once we get there, humanity will have reached its peak, and religion will die out. Religion will naturally die out. But we also have to rationally and scientifically critique religion. So scientific atheists spend a lot of time dealing with Christian tenets of faith. They say, your belief of Jesus, ﷺ, doesn't make any sense for scientific, empirical, reason-based judgments. None of that makes sense. So they start attacking individual beliefs of Christianity. And they say that we'll continue to progress, we're going to tackle religion like this, and as we progress, religion is going to die out, as well as we attack religion. That's scientific atheism. That's the way they look at religion. It existed in the past because people needed something to explain the world. Then on the other hand, we have humanistic atheism. Humanistic atheism is a little different. And this is an atheism that views religion as a social phenomenon and a manifestation of what is wrong with society. Humanistic atheism is not looking at religion as an explanation for a phenomenon. So no, rather, it's because there is suffering in the world. And because there's suffering in the world, to cope with suffering, people conjure up this being called God, that if you are able to have patience through that suffering, you'll be rewarded for that suffering. This is how they look at it. This is how they look at it. So the only way that you attacking religion, the humanistic atheist telling the scientific atheist, you attack religion is not going to solve it. Even progress in science is not going to solve it. Because people, as long as they're going through pain and suffering, they will always make up religion and make up God. So what do we have to do? We have to eliminate suffering. We have to eliminate pain, and religion will automatically disappear. What does this sound like? What do you think this automatically leads to? Yes? Yes, communism. Humanistic atheism is the fire, is the coal behind communism. That's why communists are atheists. They're humanistic atheists. They see religion as just being a natural consequence of evil in the world. If there's suffering, people are going to make up a God. So therefore, if we eliminate suffering, we eliminate religion. No need to get into these debates and discussions about Christian tenets of faith. So two different ways, two different approaches. More common in our Western world is scientific atheism, humanistic atheism, and communism didn't really survive, at least in the Western world, as we know from history. But scientific atheism is what is common today, what became more common. So this is in the 1800s and the 1900s. But today, we have a new type of atheism, and the name is called New Atheism, or the New Atheist Movement. The New Atheist Movement is a radical form of scientific atheism. Is a radical form of scientific atheism. And the reason being, if you look at this trajectory over here, okay? So throughout the 20th century, the 1900s, let's talk about America, specifically America, atheism did not have a strong backpack because it was synonymous with communism. And anything synonymous with communism, as the Red Scare, all that stuff, was automatically just thrown outside. We don't want to hear it, we don't want to talk about it. So atheism did not have a strong founding or even a strong influence in the 20th century, late 1900s. Didn't really have much of a strong influence. And atheists were not given opportunity to give dawah, at least in America. And the American politics was dominated by the right, the Christian right. They didn't give much room to atheists. However, this is one theory, and this is one theory that makes a lot of sense to me at least, is that one catalyst changed everything that was 9/11. Okay? And this was, they were able to change the record. Now you're worried about us, we're white men like you. Well, you're worried about us being the problem, and atheists are saying. You're worried about us. It's not about us. We're all together against them. We're all together against the Muslims, against the East, against the uncivilized, barbaric Muslims. Don't get time to worry about us. And so the attention kind of shifted away. But this is just one factor. You can't simplify everything just to one factor. But this is one major factor which allowed the new atheist movement to spread their dawah throughout the 2000s. And by the 2010s and 12s and 13, they had a strong influence because they had this momentum of giving open dawah. Free reign to give dawah to their atheists. The question is, why were they so fervent? Why did they want to give this new type of dawah? Didn't we already have scientific atheism? Didn't that already take place and take root in Western Europe? Well, it did, but it did not to the extent that they were expecting it to. So there's a term over here called the secularization thesis. This is the idea of the transformation of a society from close identification with religious values and institutions towards non-religious values and secular institutions. Yani from a religious world to a religious world, yani irreligious world. They had two goals. This was the dream of the scientific atheists. They had this idea, secularization thesis in the 1800s, 1700s. They're like, hey, if we continue our onslaught, we continue attacking religious tenets, and we continue advancing in science, religion's going to die out. Religion will die out. There's two goals. Overall decline in religiosity, number one. And number two, a separation of state and church, or separation of religious spheres. Religion is relegated to the private sector, do whatever you want at home, but publicly, religion won't have any discoursive value. However, come the 1900s, yeah, there's a separation of church and state. But number one was not seen. There was not an overall decline in religiosity, at least in the Americas. There was not an overall decline in religiosity. People were still holding on to faith. The atheists are like, why isn't this not working? This is supposed to work. We're supposed to have defeated religion by now. But it wasn't working. So that's why these people started a radical form of scientific atheism, and this is known as New Atheism. This New Atheism is a radical form of secularism. Like, no longer can we say, hey, worship in your private sector. No, we got to destroy that too. You should not be allowed to worship in your private sector. This is why the New Atheists, we'll talk about some of them, are very adamant of going into your private business. Like, you have people like Richard Dawkins who say that to teach religion to your children is a form of abuse. Is a form of abuse, and people should be arrested for that. Why do they want to do that? Because the secularization thesis didn't work. They said naturally people will drop religion. This did not happen naturally. So they took an active approach. That we have to destroy religion in the private sector as well. This is a form of scientization. It's a universalization of the scientific worldview. Only science is haq and nothing else is haq. Only science can make statements about truth, and nothing else can make statements about truth. Okay? Again, we're talking epistemology, right? Before, sources of knowledge. The only source of epistemology is science, and nothing else will give us knowledge. Nothing else can give us knowledge, and nothing but science should be able to tell you what's right or wrong. Nothing but science should be able to tell you about truth. Okay? So there's two core tenets of new atheism. Number one is scientism, which I just mentioned. Science is the only form of knowledge. And number two, which is evolutionism, that humanity is constantly getting better. Day by day, progress, we are getting better. The more we understand the world, the better we are as humanity. We're progressing. Muslims believe the complete opposite of this. We believe the peak of humanity, the best of people are the Prophet ﷺ, is the Prophet in his generation, the generations that come after. Right? So we are in a decline. We're not in a decline. Well, the atheists would like to argue that as we learn more about the world and as we have more scientific understanding, we are getting better as humanity. And these are the claims. Again, we don't have time to go back and forth with that, but these are the claims. So we have some famous individuals. These are the four horsemen of atheism. Okay, you guys must have heard the name Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett. Richard Dawkins is the author of The God Delusion. Sam Harris is the author of The End of Faith in the Moral Landscape. Christopher Hitchens is the author of God is Not Great. He passed away. Daniel Dennett is the author of The Breaking Star of Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. All these individuals have authored these works, and these works have picked up a lot of traction. And if you look at these works, I'm not telling you to look at these works, but if those who have looked at their works, they say, and if you analyze, all it comes down to is that primarily it's a lot of rhetoric. There's no strong argument, like I mentioned to you before, for the non-existence of God. It's all that religion leads to violence, and therefore there's for God. God cannot exist. Okay? Religions lead to violence. Religious people lead to violence. Therefore, God cannot exist. It's like saying, "I punched you, therefore I do not exist." Okay, if you want to break it down to logical form, that's basically a logical equivalent of what they're arguing for. And it's a lot of fluff, a lot of details, a lot of books that refute these 4 words and 5, 6 words. But anyways, you should know their name. If you hear their name, know they're 4 horsemen of new atheism. They have an agenda. They have a mission. They have a plan to take out not just Christianity, Islam as well. Because they're not going to say it openly. But Christianity is not their main concern anymore. Because Christianity has been watered down to nothing. Islam is what they're most concerned with. Islam is what they're most concerned with. And like I mentioned you right at the beginning, atheism is a reaction to Christianity. So scientific atheism, humanistic atheism was a reaction to Christianity. That's not going to work with Islam, because we didn't have the same problems. But new atheism is specifically targeting Islam. New atheism is specifically targeting Muslims. So this is something we have to be aware of. And naturally, we're going to think that, what do we do? What can we do in the situation that we find ourselves in? So the next few slides, ending off this discussion, let me just summarize everything we talked about. And then I'll get into the next discussion. I don't know if we have time for this. But I began this topic by letting you guys know that what we are doing today is looking at the historical analysis and rise of atheism. And atheism is a uniquely Christian problem. It is a Christian reaction. It's a reaction to the Catholic Church. Catholic Church have authority, spiritual authority, political authority, religious authority, economic authority, you name it. They rule the European West. But the church was not acting like a religion should be. The church was not acting holy. And there were many different reasons for that. And 3 factors led to the undermining of religious authority and the church authority. Number 1, the Reformation movement. Number 2, the historical critical method. Number 3, scientific discoveries. In of themselves might have been a problem, but each of these together combined to really undermine the authority of the church, and people started to lose hope in the church, and lose faith in the church, lose faith in the Bible, lose faith in what they stood for. Therefore, there's a lot of doubt. Deism. Deism is the idea God exists, but there is no Sharia or specific ritual actions that a person has to follow. This God has not communicated himself with us. And then we have atheism. Atheism comes into play with scientific advancements. Hey, we don't need God to explain these natural phenomena anymore. We can explain ourselves. No need for God. Scientific atheism. On another hand, with all the suffering, people conjured up God. So the only way that we can eliminate God and eliminate religion is we eliminate suffering. That leads to humanistic atheism, ultimately leads to communism. And then we have, of course, the new atheist movement because they saw that the secular thesis, secularization thesis didn't work. People did not become overall less religious. Even the Christians have some religiosity. The Muslims are still religious. Why this is not working? We need to take an active stance against religion, and specifically Islam. And then we have these four individuals, and then since one of them died, the next horseman that they kind of add is Lawrence Krauss. So many of you guys might have seen that debate online versus Hamza Zortzis on YouTube. So Lawrence Krauss is now considered the fourth horseman to replace the first that passed away. But the question that we want to say, what do we do? This is quite a huge and significant challenge facing us as the Muslim Ummah. And this is something that we need to think about. Well, this is not something new. Every time the Muslim Ummah was faced with a challenge, we had individuals that stood up to discuss these challenges. And that's what we call ulama, that's what we call scholars. And each field has its scholars. So let's get some terms straight. One thing we have is aqidah. Aqidah is important, right? Aqidah is a baseline belief. These are things that I believe in. A, B, C, X, Y, Z. These are the things you and I have to believe in to enter into paradise. There's no budging on that. We have to believe these things so that we enter into paradise. But there's also a secondary field that stems from aqidah. And this might be a term that some of us might not know. And this is known as ilmul kalam. Ilmul kalam, there's a fancy definition for it, discursive theology, speculative theology. But ilmul kalam has two jobs. It is to, number one, establish our belief through definitive proofs. And number two is to defend our beliefs from doubts. In essence, ilmul kalam is a defensive mechanism for our aqidah. It surrounds our aqidah, establishes it, and defends it from any external influences and questions that may come up. So ilmul kalam is a secondary discussion, a secondary field that stems from aqidah. Aqidah basic beliefs. Ilmul kalam is the field of defending our beliefs, rationally, logically, and textually and spiritually. Defending our beliefs and being able to articulate and argue for our beliefs. Okay? Ilmul kalam is not going to tell you believe in God. Why? Quran says so. That's not what ilmul kalam is going to do, because that's circular reasoning. If a Christian comes to you and say, believe in Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and he says, why? Because the Bible says so. Well, I don't believe in the Bible. That's not going to work for me. Likewise, ilmul kalam is not going to tell you believe in God. Why? Quran says so. That's circular reasoning. But ilmul kalam is going to logically, rationally prove our beliefs and establish our beliefs and defend it from erroneous beliefs. Whether in the past it was the Mu'tazila or the Shia or the Falasifa, every challenge, the theologians stepped up to the game and stepped up to the plate. Theologians in the Arabic language are known as mutakallim, singular, plural is mutakallimun. Like you have muhaddith, muhaddithun, mufassir, mufassirun, mutakallim, mutakallimun. These are theologians. These are the scholars that have stood up and faced against the problems that were posed against our aqidah. And scholars continue to do so. Again, this is what ilmul kalam is about. And just so I wanted to show you one example of what ilmul kalam is before we end off our discussion. Okay. So this is what you have three sentences over here. These three sentences together are known as a syllogism. Syllogism in Arabic known as qiyas. Syllogism is a deductive argument. You have two premises. The first two are premises. Two sentences. And then you have a conclusion. Okay? You have two premises and you have a conclusion. You have the minor premise, the major premise, and the conclusion. When you accept the minor premise as true and the major premise as true, your conclusion will necessarily be true. This is basic logic. Okay? If I tell you all humans are mortal, Zayd is a human, what's the conclusion? Zayd is mortal, right? That conclusion necessarily flows from your two premises. So ilmul kalam is going to use such arguments to prove our tenets as well. It's going to have some similar format. So this is known, and for those some of you who have studied some aqidah or kalam, this is known as the kalam cosmological argument. It's attributed to Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. He mentioned this in his al-Iqtisad. And we have an individual in the recent past, William Lane Craig, who kind of made it popularized. He wrote a book called the Kalam Cosmological Argument, and going back to al-Ghazali and others. Anyway, this is whatever begins to exist must have a cause for its existence. Premise one. Whatever begins to exist must have a cause for its existence. This bottle is here. Something must have made this bottle. This laptop, something must have made this laptop. Basic premise, very intuitive, we can agree to it. Number two, the universe began to exist. Okay? Now this, you need to prove this premise a little bit. You need to talk a little bit more about this. We're going to do that today, but this is a proven premise. Let's accept this premise. Universe began to exist. Therefore, there's a conclusion. The universe has a cause for its existence. Something must have caused the universe. This is a basic syllogism, a basic argument to establish the proof of God. There's more details to this, we're not going to get into that. But this is what Ilm al-Kalam does. Ilm al-Kalam will take different things. God has qudra, Allah has irada, the Prophet ﷺ is true, the Quran is miraculous, the Quran is from Allah. All these different things that we have is going to give us a logical argument to establish it. So Ilm al-Kalam. And this is why it's important to study. The number one thing that we need to do, if we want, the number one question we're going to have is, how do we fight this? How do we fight against atheism? Well, education. Teaching ourselves, teaching our family members, it will give us an opportunity for us to learn. It will give us an opportunity to defend our faith and to establish our faith, inshallah ta'ala. Well, we can take any questions, inshallah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So could you explain how the paradigm, right?
Aristotelian, yeah.
How was it connected with Christian theology?
And if you can please repeat the question for those.
Sure. The question was, how was the Aristotelian paradigm connected to Christian theology? That is a very long discussion. But briefly, very briefly, you have this individual named Aristotle. Okay? Aristotle was still in place. Their works were transmitted to the Muslim world via Alexandria, via Egypt. It's transmitted to the Muslim world, it gets transmitted back to the Western world. Okay? And when the Western world gets some of these ideas, they start to use these ideas to also establish their creed. And in that process, a lot of it gets mismatched. It's super simple, right? So this Neoplatonic philosophy gets mixed into Christian philosophy. An individual that's very important to this is Thomas Aquinas is very important. You have Augustine. These individuals were the head theologians, and Christianity kind of took what they had to say. So, and it was deeply engrossed with the Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy. So it was connected to that, and it was transmitted like that. So then when Christianity was kind of substantiated through that, it also had problems with Aristotelian paradigm. But it's too much for me to discuss over there. But there are some books that I can recommend to you that are. There's one book called The Passion of the Western Mind by Richard Tarnas. It details this entire thing in lots of time. It's a good book. Yes.
A follow-up to that, if those individuals like Aquinas, you said, didn't necessarily make that a part of the theology, then would it, like Christianity would not rely on Aristotelian theology potentially?
I mean, Allah, I don't know what would have happened if they didn't, but they were significant people, significant contributors to that idea of establishing Christian theology through Aristotelian and Platonic lens. Yes.
How are these modern atheists attacking Islam now? What is their methodology?
The question was, how are these modern atheists attacking Islam? It's a lot of emotional arguments, a lot of rhetoric. If you see their works, they will, again, the primary argument that they make is religion leads to war. Religion leads to violence. That's their primary argument. And there's no need, and it has to do a lot with morality as well. The Western morality is something that's not based in anything. It has no basis, it has no foundation. So therefore, they will take their subjective morality and try to apply it to our objective morality, and they will use that to undermine religious value. Now, if you look at that, from that subjective perspective, from that emotional perspective, they're going to use certain examples. I don't want to mention that over here right now, but they will use certain examples to undermine religion But we have to understand that what they use as subjective morality is always changing. They will take things, if you look at their books from 10 years ago, what they wrote 10 years ago, it might not really apply anymore. Because what they use as their subjective morality then is not considered moral today, or is not considered immoral today. So they're taking their fleeting standards of morality. Because as an atheist, you have no grounding in morality. And this is one of the strongest arguments for God as well, the moral argument. Because an atheist does not have a standard or a grounding. Any theist has grounding, any theist, yani a believer, has a grounding in his morality by placing that grounding in something objective, that is God. While as an atheist does not have the ability to do so. Because we are all just a product of evolution. There is no difference between us and the fish and the donkey and the mice. So a person who believes who is committed to such a worldview cannot argue from morality, right? If it's survival of the fittest, then anything that it allows us to survive should be the most, again, quote unquote, moral thing. So they'll take that standard and apply that to Islam, where it won't work because you cannot apply that to Islam. That's the majority of their arguments are based upon these two things: morality and violence. Yes.
A follow-up question to that is, you mentioned that these are post-Catholic kind of, the humanistic atheism, but later on, would you say that the modern atheists are almost like post-Judeo, because of like people like Sam Harris, who I think comes from a Jewish background? Do you feel like now these Jewish atheists are also kind of, they have like a more vindictive thing towards Islam?
So the brother asked that. The brother asked the question that humanistic atheism, as I mentioned, was kind of post-Catholicism. Just one clarification: Catholicism didn't die out, though. It was a reaction to that, but Catholicism didn't die out; it still exists. It was a reaction to Catholicism. So the brother asked, would I say? Would you say that these new atheists will also post-Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic tradition? Because Sam Harris himself is of Jewish descent, as an atheist, and they have this sort of agenda against Muslims. I mean, of course, I'm sure they do, right? They have a specific agenda against Muslims. They don't like Muslims, and Muslims are the only ones that are actually holding firm on to what they believe. Christians, right, like I mentioned to you before, are very, very loose, right? In Catholic Christianity today, homosexuality is considered a legal form of marriage. It's permitted, whereas in Islam, that's still something that we stand firm upon. So they have more of an issue with Islam because we stick to our religion, we stick to our core tenets of belief. Does it have maybe other biases? I'm sure they do, but that's all I can say. Yes.
I have a question. Like just now you have mentioned about the morality.
Yes.
So like for us as an adult, it's very easy to tackle that situation. But for the adolescent, like the kids of middle schools, how they should tackle these things, because it's like a very new thing for them here. And like for them, what is not, like for us, what is moral, it is not for them. And it's more like that all the peer groups are having the same scenario, like boyfriend, girlfriends, sort of these things. So how they are going to tackle these things then?
So the brother asked that how are the youth today going to tackle the moral problems that we face today? Well, the first step is that the young men and women are educated before they are thrown into the environment, and they are educated and taught some of these arguments and questions and answers and contentions. So they're prepared. So it shouldn't be that the first time they hear these contentions are from an atheist. They should hear these contentions from their parents or their teachers. Like, look, somebody might say this, well, this is our response. Somebody might say that, this is our response. So the answer is quite simple, just through education. Right? If we educate our young men and women to be able to learn and understand these things, they will be able to face these things to an extent. Of course, they're still going to need help. No one's infallible. Everyone's going to need help. Everyone needs to come back to ulama. Everyone needs to come back to their parents and teachers to be able to constantly and consistently increase in their knowledge. But we have to give them some baseline. And the baseline comes from aqidah and studying ilm al-kalam and studying aqidah. They need that baseline. Yes.
Who are some good scholars or speakers that we can listen to who are kind of at the forefront of combating new atheism?
Mufti Sabri. Mufti Sabri have a lot of videos on YouTube, and I personally benefited from them a lot as well. Ustad Hamid Zortes has a lot of good videos online. There's also Sheikh Hamid Kambari. He has this institution called Wasila Education. So So he has some courses called Why Islam is True and Why the Prophet of Islam is True. They're very excellent series of lectures. Some of them are free, and some of it is a paid course. I would 100% recommend that course. It's quite beneficial.
Can you repeat that course again?
Sorry?
Can you repeat that course again?
Oh yeah, the course name is Why Islam is True at Basira Education.
Just want to make a short announcement for the women who have questions, inshallah. You can go to ask.projectihya.com and type your question in there, and then inshallah we'll have it answered here. Again, it's ask.projectihya.com.
Yes.
Is there any similarities between communism and atheism?
Yes. The communism is a direct result of humanistic atheism. It was the fuel that was ideological fuel for communism. So humanistic atheism, the idea that God is a conjured up being to help with suffering and evil that exists out there in the world. That's the fuel for communism. Yes. So, yes.
As Muslims, we try to convey, it's easy for us to get a Christian to deny the Trinity. And so, because, you go through the steps and say, who would take care of Isa Islam as a baby if you think that, he is of anything that's a deity. And, so it's easy to get to them to that point. But to be a proper da'i in Islam is very dangerous if you don't have the proper training. These syllogisms that you're saying, alhamdulillah, they do teach us this, but it's very dangerous, in the hands of children to go with these kind of theories if we don't have, the proper ilm. I understand, it makes perfect sense, but isn't it dangerous? My question really is, alhamdulillah, in being only 1 to 2% in this country, don't we have the onus is on us to actually learn our deeds before we try to propagate, these kind of arguments?
So the brother mentioned a very, very good point, is that we should know our deen before we propagate it. And that's exactly what it is. The point of learning these syllogisms and even aqidah and ilm al-kalam is not to go debate somebody else. That's left for the masters. That's left for the people who actually know their stuff in and out, who have experience and under the guidance of the teachers, right? That's not something for every average Zayda Ahmad to do. The point of learning this is so that we understand it. So it helps and strengthens our faith and protects ourselves from different questions that come up around us, for ourselves, for our family, for the children, for the young ones, for the teenagers. The purpose is that now we take this and now we go, hey, my non-Muslim friend, my Christian friend, let me debate you today. That's not the point, because we're not trained to do so, and that's what the brother is saying, and I completely agree with you on that. That the purpose of ilm and education is for ourselves, first and foremost. And the job of now conveying to the masses, and this is the problem with the online Dawah scene, right? Or the online, debate culture that we see on YouTube. We see people who haven't studied much, studied a little bit here and there, and now they want to, debate everybody under the sun. This is not, it's not the way of our tradition is that we study for a number of years with our ulama, and we help the people around us, and not necessarily have, we don't need to go debate everybody out there. The point is to preserve ourselves and our family members. Yes.
What if you're not doing this debate, but just convey the message of Islam? Because the Prophet he said that convey from me even if it's one verse. So how do you find that balance between not knowing enough but also wanting to do a little bit of that one?
Yeah. So you can. The question brother asked that how do you balance this with conveying the message to other people because the Prophet said explain to people or convey to people with one ayah, right? Conveying the message is different than discussing debating theological points. Right? You can convey the message of Islam and without having to get into any of these type of things. So you can convey the message. If you get to a point where you don't know the answer, you say, I don't know, and get back to it. Right? But the problem is people get debated and heated, and a lot of young people do this, and then we see that they make a lot of mistakes.